I want to keep discussing how God gave me a revelation on kings and queens. I would love to say I was sitting on a rock and the sky opened up and God gave me a special revelation. However, that's not how God gives me revelation. Let me share how this revelation came about in my life. I was just turning 30. I was managing a thriving counseling practice, published books, speaking, an author, doing some media here and there, and it was fun. And my friend and publisher, Steve Strand, called me one day and told me he was getting a group of Christian business guys together to start like a peer group, okay? And, you know, iron sharpening iron, and he'd been part of a secular group of high achievers for years, but he wanted a Christian version of this to really strengthen each other. And I'll never forget it because it was just shortly after September 11th and after the planes were flown into the World Trade Center. And we met in Orlando, Florida in Steve's office, and we went around the room and each man shared about his business and about the ministries that they were doing around the world. Every man in this group was radically changing the world, not just through their business, but they each had a ministry. Some were giving millions a year to missions, some supporting large ministries, others creatively solving problems in their community in the name of Jesus through their gifts and their resources. Now, mind you, I was the youngest, poorest, and probably the least influential man at the table. And I was humbled as each man was sharing how God was using them in their various ways. Now, after several men were sharing, because we went kind of around the room, the Lord spoke to me that these are all kings. And I didn't know exactly what that meant at the time, but after walking with them and being mentored by them for about 20 years, I know that God has kings and queens, and most of us are them. We can learn and grow in this understanding, this calling and gifting, and it feels really fulfilling to serve Christ as, pastor or a mega church minister who is touching and changing the world the way they're supposed to be doing. But it's also just as satisfying to walk in your full calling as a king and queen. And I'll never forget how free I felt, even though I have a master's in divinity and I felt like I was going to be a pastor or some type of, ministry person. He made me a king. And for the first time in my life, I could articulate that calling. And since that day, I felt free, never inferior because I wasn't leading a church. Okay? God has many priestly men and women doing that with excellence. And I mean excellence. They're great at it. He needed me to be shamelessly a king and move in the particular sphere of influence in counseling, writing, and speaking, especially in the many sensitive areas in which he has me addressed to help and strengthen and heal and set men free and marriages free through Christ, okay, who struggle in these areas of weakness. He needed me in that part of the wall. So you too can enter your ministry regardless of what it is. You don't need permission. Now, unless you're doing it through your church. If you're doing it through your church, then talk to your pastors, make sure you get their blessing and all that. But if you're not, you don't. Most kingly and queenly ministries are done in homes, businesses, online, with others, in other settings, okay? Even in community centers where things are happening, there's people who do all kinds of ministries. And this is what we are encouraging at Healing Times. We're committed to doing and equipping the kings and queens to do whatever ministry there is. That's why we have so many different types of groups on our website that you can start in your home. You can start in your church if your pastor permits you to, but you can do it online with your friends. Why are they doing these ministries? It's because they're kings and queens doing exactly what they're supposed to do. I have heard queens just collect change in a church to support an orphanage. A man who sponsors a basketball tournament in his community to bring young people to Christ. Lawyers who fight for justice from a Christian perspective. People building orphanages and providing water in African villages and other places around the world. The calling of kings and queens are so unique and so diverse. There is no way that you can plan what God's calling your royal hands and hearts to do. All I can tell you is first be open to it and say, Lord, here I am. I'm your servant. I'm your king. I'm your queen. And it may seem like right now you got so little in your hands. That's because you're in a season of faithfulness. Just like the guys who got the talents, they were servants, they were slaves, and they got this money and they had to be responsible, but they went from being a slave to partnering with the master to then leading later on. And they weren't put in priestly positions, they were put in governors over cities. Okay? So you never know where God's going to lead you to, but knowing that you are his royal, that what's under you, and it might be that you just, you have a regular job. What's under you, serve that employee with excellence. If you have a sense of there's this problem in the world, and it really bothers me that this problem is in the world, that might be your kingly or queenly calling to solve that problem. I just had lunch with someone yesterday, breakfast rather, yesterday, and he's solving a medical issue. And he is so excited about bringing this treatment and this healing into the world and for Christians to have so they can have health in this area. I have another friend of mine who's working on health from a different perspective and wrote a book and changing the world with that. And so your calling may be different and will be different than probably anyone else you know. Your heart for the people in a certain country, your desire to travel to a place to minister in that place, your desire to make sure that maybe this little village has a well for water. I know guys who that's what they're called to do, and they've been putting wells of water all over the world. They're kings, they're engineers, and that's what they feel called to do. So whatever your calling is, all I would say is to you, God, ask him. Say, God, here I am. Use me. What is it that I can put my hands and heart to? And then equip me to do that. And he will answer that sincere prayer.